We are now going to be going into our next section of the day, where we're going to be looking at EV over a couple of different topics. So as you can see, the next title is the future of EV ownership and AI, where Erin Baker is going to be taking us through. So just a description, hi Erin, just a description on the session. So Erin's going to examine the EV and AI car markets to answer the pressing questions around car usage that could dictate commuting trends for the foreseeable future. She will examine why electric car sales are plateauing, analyse whether and how they can make a comeback, and question when, if ever, we might be commuting in self-driving cars and EVs. So a little bit about Erin. So Erin Baker is editorial director at Auto Trader. She is also a World Car of the Year judge, car writer for Vogue and Marie Claire, consultant for Goodwood, and co-host of She's Electric. She appears regularly on BBC Radio and TV to talk about motoring matters, and her automotive industry passions are sustainability and gender equality. So Erin, great to have you here. And we'll just remind everybody as well, before I hand over to you, Erin, there is going to be a panel session where Erin will be included in about 20 minutes time, where there'll be a Q&A as part of that. So if you have any questions for Erin, please do go on Slido and put your questions in there. And as we've been saying, you can win a copy of Nikki Perfect's book, Crisis, and Nikki will be talking to us later today. So with all of that, Erin, I'm going to be passing over to you now to talk about the future of EV ownership and AI. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for having me. So a short little topic today, the future of EV ownership and AI. I think to get us going, really, in order to understand the future of electric vehicle ownership, especially here in the UK, but also in Europe, globally, we need to look at the state of the market currently as it is. So if we go to the first slide we've got, this, I'll be drawing heavily on Auto Trader's data. Auto Trader, for those of you who aren't aware of what we do, we're a FTSE 100 company, but also the largest digital marketplace for cars in the UK. So our data sets are really massive, and we talk a lot to the government about what we've got, what trends we see. So where are we now currently today, as we come to the end of September in 2024? EV sales have not stopped altogether. You know, a lot of the media are kind of, those are the headlines we're seeing. It's slowed significantly, and the remaining growth is driven largely by fleet and company cars, retail purchases, private buyers are dwindling hugely. So where are we? We're at 17.2% of the current share of new car sales is electric. It's up from 16.4% last year, but it's not at the magic 22%, which, for those of you who know about the government's zero emissions vehicle mandate, ZEV mandate, that stipulates that by the end of this year, 22% of every OEM, every car brand's new car sales in the UK must be electric. Very few car brands, unless they are all electric to begin with, are going to naturally hit that 22% share this year. And if they don't hit it, the fines are punitive. The fines currently stand at £15,000 per vehicle manufactured that doesn't hit the above the 22% share. So OEMs are doing all they can to hit 22% market share this year. They are borrowing forward on next year's allocation, because every year the ZEV mandate rises all the way up to 80% of sales having to be electric by 2030. So they're borrowing forward on next year. They are buying carbon credits off other manufacturers, people like Tesla, BYD, that are already pure electric. Or, as is the case of Stellantis and other big brands, they're looking at potentially capping sales of new petrol and diesel cars in order to hit the percentage of electric cars. So there are ramifications for consumers to consider. Next slide. Another way of looking at where we are and why it's so hard for the UK currently to really shift the dial and speed up these sales of private vehicles being electric again and hit these ZEV government mandates is if we look at this brilliant diffusion of innovations curve. This isn't a curve that's anything to do with the automotive industry. It's a curve that goes right back to the 60s in America by a great guy called Everett Rogers, who said that any industry, you will naturally hit 16% take up of that new product simply by innovators and early adopters being enthusiastic about it. You know, and surprise, surprise, if you add together the 2.5% innovators and the 13.5% early adopters, you get to 16%, which is where electric car sales have been hovering. Then you have this huge chasm in take up before you get onto early majority buyers. The kind of 30-40% of the market taking up this new technology. And this chasm is where we are at the moment. And it's why without incentives, without Labour really stepping in to help shift the market, and without OEMs doing things to kind of manipulate the market, it's very hard to get much beyond 16-17% take up of electric cars. We can go to the next slide. So another way of looking at it, in 2028, we need to hit 52% of new car sales being pure electric in order to keep on track with government targets. And we're currently at 17.2. Look at that. And we're meant to be at 22%. So that's another great graphic illustration of it. Next slide. So the good news, you know, choice and range are improving for consumers. And some savings still exist, although it's a bit of a harder case to make. But choice, absolutely. We have so much more choice in the market than ever before. We've got 118 models, brand new, pure electric models available to buy in the UK right now. And that's an increase of 84 models versus 3 years ago. So you can see how car brands are doing their bit really to bring the products to market for people to buy. You know, big SUVs, small SUVs, city cars, estates, supercars, sports cars. There's something for everyone that's electrified now. Range is also increasing because batteries are getting more efficient as new technology comes on board and everyone works out how to do better cells and better packs that are more dense in energy and more efficient. So 275 miles is the average battery range of new electric cars these days. It doesn't sound like a lot compared with petrol and diesel, but that's an increase of an average 52 miles versus 3 years ago, which really is quite a step change in technology. Savings, well, unsurprisingly, the biggest savings for electric car owners are still to be had by those who can charge on their own driveways at home, where we calculate there's still a saving versus fuel of on average £133 based on 1,000 miles per 1,000 miles driven. You can see that £133 saving absolutely falls off a cliff if people are having to rely on public chargers, be they slow or fast chargers, you know, and don't even talk to me about rapid and ultra rapid charging and the cost of that. We know that in many cases those charging points are more expensive than petrol and diesel right now and motorway services, and that in no way helps the adoption of electric cars. Next slide. As I said, fleets are largely meeting these targets. It's retail that's falling behind. Fleet and businesses are at 22%. Retail buyers, look at that, just 9%. It's really these private buyers that between the industry and the government and the media, we have to be incentivizing. Next slide. Affordability, unsurprisingly, is the key to unlocking demand for private buyers. When it comes to new cars, and only roughly a third of us buy new, the vast majority of us in this country still buy used, and most of us buy on finance. But for new electric cars, there's still a 30% price differential on that price tag between electric and petrol, which is simply not good enough. You know, I spoke earlier about the great increase in choice, absolutely, for consumers when it comes to electric. But in terms of prices, there are only 16 new EVs for sale at the moment in the UK under £30,000. And we know that most people, when questioned about how much they're going to spend on their next car, talk about a maximum of £20,000. So we know that there's an absolute disconnect there. Much higher upfront cost, £51,000 is the median price of a new EV right now. Next, please. So car brands, again, I would say are doing their bit. You know, we've seen a huge discount. We've seen a growth in the percentage discount that OEMs are offering off the price of new electric cars to try and incentivize buyers and get the market moving again. As we see on average from new electric cars advertised on Auto Trader, an average new car discount of 11%. That's that really bright blue line at the top. You can see how high above diesel, for example, that is, and petrol. Next, please. Depreciation has then fueled the used EV market, and I think there's a big job to be done here by the media in particular, actually, in making people aware of the used EV market. You know, for most people, because electric is such a new idea, they're not thinking that actually electric cars in many cases have been around for a decade. You look at the likes of Tesla, BMW, Renault, Nissan. They've all had electric cars in the market for 10 years or more. So there is a really healthy and growing used electric car market where supply is still greater than demand. So we're seeing a lot of depreciation. We've seen something like 20 months of consecutive price drops for used electric cars. And in many cases now, there are a lot of 3-year-old electric cars in the market that are priced at the same or cheaper than their petrol counterparts. If we move on. As I said, 3 years and older for used EVs, they offer a great opportunity. There are 1.7 million 3-year-old cars on the road. Well, sorry, there will be 1.7 million 3 years old plus electric cars on the road in 2028. That's 10 times more than there were last year. And they're affordable, they're at price parity. We have to talk then about the things that are still holding people back from buying them, things around battery health, reliability, which I'll come on to if we can go to the next slide. And just to reiterate again, look at this gap, 34% would consider an electric car for their next purchase, but we need to be in 4 years time, in 2028, up to this 52% uptake. So to get people from wanting to make the switch, you know, I think most of us want to be doing the right thing for the planet. Most of us want to be buying electric, but to get us from that kind of consideration phase up to actually buying, there's a huge challenge ahead. Next slide, please. What are those main challenges? Probably unsurprising for most of you. Public charging. 37% of people say that's the main barrier to EV adoption, followed swiftly by upfront cost. We have to, the industry, the media, the government, Labour, has to address these. Then 25% say they have no home charging. The running costs are still unclear. And the news stories, which we'll come on to in a moment, it's a bit of a sore one for me being a journalist, but you know, I'm a part of the problem, I've got to be part of the solution. The public charging one, this huge barrier, upfront barrier, is both the number of chargers, the time it takes to charge, the reliability of the chargers. Do we have to have 15 different apps on our phone and subscriptions to download in order to use the chargers? A wealth of stuff to unpack there. Public charging points were at 60,000 and rapidly growing. But how many of them are rapid and ultra rapid, which is the ones that people really need to enable them to do splash and dash, as we call it, in the middle of their journey and not have to scout around for one that takes 2 hours to charge because it's fast, it's not rapid. So much to unpack there in public charging. If we can move on. In other words, consumers need reasons to move to electric, but what they're hearing are reasons not to move. If we look at the media stuff, which I just talked about briefly there and touched on, a staggering 43% of consumers that we spoke to believe that electric vehicles catch fire and it's really holding them back from making the switch. And yet we know that if we speak to the fire services, Scandinavian countries where uptake is greatest, we're into the 0.003, 0.007% of vehicle fires being attributed to electric cars in the past couple of years. They don't catch fire. They don't catch fire half as much as petrol and diesel cars do. There is an issue around thermal runaway when they do catch fire, but in the main, they don't catch fire. Long queues for public charge points. Well, actually, as more public charge points come on, these are rapidly starting to diminish. As more people put in workplace charging, destination charging, it's starting to diminish the number of people who will need to charge en route. As electric cars get a greater range, as the batteries become more efficient, that also goes down. Insurance is more expensive. It is. The insurance business has to do something about that. But as data comes on track, which shows that repairs of electric cars are speeding up in this country, more technicians are being being trained, we hope that those insurance premiums will come down too. So there's more to work on. Oh yes, and could cause aging car parks to collapse. Well, if the entire car park in the UK was to go electric at the same time and they were all to drive 3-ton 7-seat SUVs, it's a vague possibility. It's extremely unlikely to happen. Next, please. So we're breaking the barriers in summary, but very slowly and not quickly enough in order to switch to mass transition. That's the key thing here. Next, please. Charging point provision, another quick point on that public charging point provision. It's actually fine for now because 82% of people are charging their electric car at home. But we're nearing the exhaustive pot of the amount of people that got driveways. As I said, for mass adoption, we've got to get to the people who live in city centres, people that don't have off-road charging provisions. And that really is crucial then to talk about the charging network. One of the things that we're pushing the government to do, Auto Trader, is to reduce the VAT on public energy from the 20% it's currently at to the 5% that domestic electricity is currently at, because otherwise there's a ridiculous chasm between the amount that it costs somebody to charge their car at home at 6 pence per kilowatt hour and the amount it charges someone to charge at an ultra rapid motorway service station, which could be as high as 80-90 pence per kilowatt hour, at which point it's more expensive than petrol. Next, please. Yeah, well, this is really just reiterating what I've said. Most people, as well as addressing the actual facts of the matter, the government having to bring in back some cuts on VAT and look at ways to incentivize people financially, we have to talk to people and address their mindsets in the media, in social media, in marcoms, in any way that retailers and OEMs reach out to consumers. Address the fact that they're worried about there not being enough charging points. Address worries about public charging points being broken so they can't use it. That the EVs take too long to charge. That they're worried that it's using a lot of electricity from their property and is it sustainable? And that charging points are expensive to install and use. We have to encourage OEMs to include charging installation and charging points at home as part of the package when people buy an EV, for example. It's going to take a lot of soft incentives and a lot of thinking outside the box to enable consumers to make the switch. Next, please. Oh, and next one, please. I think we're now moving on, to some of these. We did some word cloud stuff at Auto Trader where we looked at the big things that are holding people back: reliability, battery health, data, waiting times, repairs. All of this can be addressed. We know, for example, with battery health certificates are coming into being now. Batteries come with 8-year warranties. We have to get that out to people. We're finding from our data that actually most batteries are losing 1 to 2% of performance a year. So you could buy a 6-year-old EV and the battery should still be fine. All these things we have to consistently get out in messaging. I wish Labour would do a public information campaign. It would be relatively cheap, relatively painless, and a way to engage with lots of people. I think that's the end of my EV bit, but now probably a holding slide for me to do a quick bit on AI, if we move on. Yes, this is my blue sky AI beautiful slide. Because the AI bit would be relieved to know is not me throwing data at you, but a quick look at where we are with self-driving. Self-driving is one of those things that, was a big kind of buzzword and term in the industry and the media a few years ago when everyone thought that, Jetson-style pods zooming us all around on our commute would be a matter of a few years before it all appeared. And that certainly we'd have the option to get in a car, take our hands off the wheel, sit back and do the crossword. It hasn't come into being as soon as everyone thought. There are a few things to say about that. One, there's this misconception of what self-driving is. You know, a lot of us are driving cars with self-driving capability at the moment. If you take something like adaptive cruise control in a car, which most brands offer now, where it will do the braking and the acceleration and the steering for you, and simply requires your hand to be on the wheel in order for liability purposes, really, not because the car needs it, then you could say we're up to a certain level of autonomy already, and exactly what is it that we want beyond that? We've had lots of trials in California, a few in Europe, of self-driving cars that use two different sorts of AI, generative AI and embodied AI. And the industry is split on which way to go. And it's that's what's partly also slowing down the rollout of this technology. If you take a company like Wave, which has begun trials on UK roads of fully self-driving cars, it's using embodied AI, which is where it teaches the car to learn what to do in a certain situation by inputting data from commutes, from a huge amount of people commuting in their cars all over the world to understand scenarios and to teach the car how to react to those scenarios, so that the car can then be in any city, in any landscape, and it should know what to do. Generative AI, people say that's not good enough. The level of data from commutes that we have at the moment doesn't cover every possible scenario, and it's dangerous. And we have to keep scanning and mapping cities and only allowing self-driving cars to be in the cities that we've scanned and mapped. Those are the two thoughts, and they're running in parallel at the moment. It's hard to know which one will play out. Maybe both of them will simultaneously. I think the thing to say about self-driving cars is that the applications where they make most sense at the moment are with trucking. In America, they are saving an awful lot of time and money with trucks. And the other application is with ride-hailing applications for commuting. And we'll see more of that coming on board in the next couple of years. Sorry, I've probably totally overrun my time. I will stop now.
You're fine, Erin. Thank you very much. Again, these topics are so broad. I know how hard it can be to fit it into a short session, but we will be having the panel and the Q&A shortly.